I've got a story for you folks regarding Rugby League. Well, it's not a story, it's an observation, it's thoughts. Observation and thoughts from myself, Britain's grumpiest old git. And I'm going to be really, really grumpy for those that don't agree with me. Those that watch Rugby League that aren't going to agree with what I'm going to tell you in a minute, I'm very grumpy. I'm not on your side at all. You're not in my gang. To be in my gang, you've got to agree with this. Now, it involves last night. I'm watching the World Club Challenge there, Wigan against the Penrith Panthers. We've covered it earlier. The video will already be out. You might have seen it, you might not. That's irrelevant. But I mentioned I was going to touch on Rugby League later, and this is it now. While the game is on last night, I'm watching it on Sky, and I'm watching the Sky coverage of it. I watched it later. I recorded it and watched it late on. On the camera, I went a couple of times to Billy Boston in the stand there. I think Billy's getting on now. I think I read online. I think he's about 88 years of age. A real stalwart of Rugby League, following Rugby Union, of course. Born in Wales there. Came to Wigan many a year ago. Played with them for many a year, scored many a try, and was a wonderful servant to the club. And many say the greatest winger they've ever had. Many say the greatest rugby player of all time, or the greatest British player of all time. And I hear it time and again. I often hear the greatest winger. And it sticks in my craw a bit because it's just not right. I'm not having it. I just can't have it. I just can't have it. You may know where I'm going to because I'm from that there Warrington. If you know anything about Rugby League from years gone by, you'll know where I'm getting to at the end. But I'll save the last bullet for the last one. We'll go with Boston first. I was looking at Billy, and for all he was a fantastic winger, I mean, he's got bundles of tries. I believe his greatest, his greatest talent was his actual body size, his weight. He used it tremendously. I believe he couldn't be stopped when in flight. I believe he was extremely strong, very, very big build, very heavy fella, but very, very fast with it. And he got anywhere near the line, and I believe he just had no chance. But I looked at some stats last night, and Billy, how many games did he play? He played 488 games for Wigan and scored 478 tries. I mean, it's phenomenal. They've had Martin O'Fire since. They've had your Martin O'Fires, your Henderson Gills, your Jason Robinsons. But all the aficionados say the best winger they've ever had is Boston. And with them stats, I can concur. I understand that. But at the time, he was playing against two other real speedsters, two other great wingers. One was across the divide there at St Helens, Tom van Vollenhoven. I've heard lots about Van Vollenhoven. I don't know him at all, but my uncle used to speak really highly of him. My uncle's the guy that got me into Rugby League when I was 4 or 5, and I went to the games with for 15, 20 years. Love the guy. He's not with us anymore, unfortunately, but he sat me off in Rugby League very, very young, and he used to regularly talk about Van Vollenhoven in glowing terms. And Boston, but probably more so Van Vollenhoven. He played at Saints there, and in 409 games, he got 382 tries. Again, absolutely fantastic. It's not quite the strike rate of Boston's, but it isn't a million miles behind. But then we go to what my mate would call, or would say, the Champione. There can be only one. There can be only one. Probably the greatest rugby player of all time. And I mean of all time. I've read so much about the fella. I've seen so much. I've seen some old footage, but it is old. I've actually seen him in the flesh once, but it was only in a charity game. But I'm obviously talking about the great Brian Bevan. Australian of birth, came over here and just ripped it up. The most unlikely rugby hero you'll ever see. False teeth, bandages on his knees, looked like an old man when he wasn't. He played rugby at 25 and looked 45 years of age. Nothing to him, a will-o'-the-wisp fella. But speed to absolutely burn, and a handoff like nobody ever had. People have said to me, this O'Fire is the closest to him. This O'Fire's good. He's really good. He's nowhere near as good as Brian. Absolutely nowhere near. Let me give you these figures. And this is for a team when Warrington, they weren't winning trophies. They won the odd trophy, but hardly anything. They were never top of the tree. They weren't a top of the tree team. But Brian Bevan for Warrington only. 620 games. So he played more than Boston by 140. More than Van Vollenhoven by 200. But 620 games, 740 tries. 740 tries in 620 games. It's never been beaten. It never will be beaten. That strike rate is like, you might get a player that gets 120 tries in 100 games and it's fantastic. But that's 100 games, that's like 2.5, 3 seasons. There's no longevity there. 620 games is a lot of games. 740 tries. incredible. It's really incredible. It's just unbelievable. And it reminds me, somebody told me a story once about Brian, because I'm going to do something about Brian further down the line when we're a bigger channel. I've got something else about Brian that I'd like to air, but I come across a fellow once, a good few years ago now. He was an accountant, and an accountant of mine introduced me to him, a chap called Bernard Ganley. The older ones of you will remember him. I did something on him, I think, when this channel first started, or I mentioned him to somebody, and I couldn't remember his name. It just didn't come to me, and it's come to me tonight. That's on my memories. I've not looked at it, but he used to be a fullback, I believe, for Oldham. He was the fullback at Oldham. He also played for Great Britain. I think I looked in the stats about a year and a half ago, because I was thinking of this story, because he told it me, good grief, 25 years ago now. I think he only had 3 caps for Great Britain. I think they were all against France, and I think he won every single game single-handedly with his boot. I believe he's probably the greatest goal kicker, English goal kicker we've ever had. He could kick goals from absolutely anywhere at a time when the ball was really, really heavy. The pitches were like mud baths, and his boots were almost as heavy as the pitches. But he could kick goals from anywhere. I believe one of the practice routines he did was he'd put the ball on the touchline, both touchlines at Oldham, and he'd aim to hit one of the posts, and he'd try to hit the post, and more often than not he could hit the post. That's how accurate he was. Now I don't think he was the world's fastest fullback. I think I've read that somewhere. But the times Brian Bevan has put him on his backside are legendary. He said to me that we were talking, and he mentioned that he played for Great Britain and who he was, and I said, my uncle has said he'd seen the Great Warrington team, and Brian, he said, oh, Brian, there's never been anybody like Brian, never. He said, and he told me about a fire. He said, this fire's good. In fact, he told me the story. Nowhere near Brian. He said, absolutely nowhere near. There'll never be anyone. I said, well, they rave about Billy Boston and Van, but he said, great players, and he told me the strengths and the weaknesses of them both. He said, but Brian was something else. He said, you thought you had Brian, and you were clutching when you thought, I've got him now, and then he'd be gone. He said he had a hand off on him, and he put it in your face or your upper body, and he was going at such pace, or he knew how to do it to get you off balance, and he'd push you over, and you'd think, how's he managed to do that? This old-looking fellow with bandages round his knees and false teeth and emancipated face, and he'd think, how does he do it? He said, he was just a freak of nature, an absolute freak, and that's what it was. He said, but the speed, he said, his speed was unbelievable. He said he had a sight and a swerve. He said the swerve was phenomenal. He said, but he'd go all over the pitch. He said he'd start in one corner and end up in the other. He'd run behind his goals and end up scoring. He said he used to do things that nobody had ever done before or since. He said he was unbelievable. He said, I'm telling you now, as long as, he said, I watch rugby league, I'll never see anybody better than Brian Bevan. And he said to me, and he said, you young man, he called me, he said, you young man, you're 20, 30 years younger than me, you never will either. And from what my uncle told me, from what Bernard Ganley told me that day, and from what I've read, I think he's probably spot on. Brian was just a freak of nature. So it does me head in every time Sky go on to Billy Boston. I know he's an hero, I know he's brilliant, I know he's probably the best winger Wiggins ever had and scored record amounts of tries, but don't people be telling me he's the best he's ever been. Not when there's been someone here in Warrington that has defined wing play. I mean, nobody in World Rugby League, as far as I'm aware, has got anywhere near Brian's figures. Nowhere near. So, the best of all time for me, Brian Bevan, without a doubt. And I never seen him live apart from one charity game. But based on people who are believing, have told me, I'm putting him up as numero uno.